But in the context of the Buddha's teachings, is there a particular teaching which you find significant or important, and maybe one that you feel is appropriate, needed for people these days, especially with all the teaching that you've done, and maybe a specific teaching that you find helpful that you relate and tell people?
Yes, I would pinpoint my focus really since I first practiced on the practice of Sammasati in the Eightfold Path, which leads you to the set of instructions the Buddha gave. Yes, we call it a sutta, text-based. It was actually it was oral from the beginning. Anyway, this sati, which means mindfulness, and the text, the set of instructions is Satipatthana Vipassana. So that means the establishment of mindfulness, and the Buddha outlined how to do it. The body, the feelings, the consciousness, and mental objects, the mind itself. So it's what I've been practicing probably since I came across it in India, in Varanasi, about 40 odd years, and it's been my focus. And this is what we teach here, the Satipatthana Vipassana. Vipassana Sati is the practice, mindfulness. Everybody now, there's been a big wave of interest in Western countries with mindfulness, and Vipassana that's the cause, that's the practice, and the effects is insight, which means Vipassana. So Satipatthana Vipassana, and there's different levels of it. And so it's become popular, and it's used mostly as a therapeutic tool, and that's good. The interest is there, but it is mostly confined as a healing tool. And the Buddha states in the text that yes, it is for healing, especially in Kayanupassana on the body and in one's daily routine. So it can be very much taken into integrated into one's daily life, for sure. And that's what's happening. It's possible. It's not just a formal practice, but so that is the teaching that of the whole variety of Buddhist teachings. That and the metta, loving kindness meditation, the Brahmaviharas. That nicely combines with uplifting the mind, sweetening the mind, with mudra vipassana. So that combination works.
So in that sense, it's the Satipatthana being very psychological, even scientific,
Surely.
In terms of bringing mindful awareness to those four domains, those four areas that make up our whole being, and then also adding in the kindness and care for self and for others to sort of soften things a bit so that we don't become too cold and clinical in our approach to the mind-body complex.
Yes, John. I think too, people read a lot about, study or hear a lot about Buddhist teachings or practice, but don't implement it. For me, Buddha Dharma, teachings of the Buddha, is a practice. Practice is repeated performance to develop a skill. And what we find, say, in neuroscience, that you can get benefit, from repetition, focusing, being present, and it actually can overcome, it's both healing, but essentially, done in its depths, intensively, it's transformational. And that's what the Buddha really, the question was, what is the benefit of it? Ultimately, allowing that along the way, it's healing, it's therapeutic, but when it becomes transformational, it brings ultimate realization, possible, potentially. So that's what I'm as a practitioner, and this centre here would eventually, I hope, be geared up so that we would support people doing that intensive, as well as people who just beginners. So we run also one-day workshops, but 10-day retreats, which is also really introductory. So the benefit has been appreciated now, and but that deeper practice, unless we have intensive long-term practice, it's unlikely that people will get in the depths that will bring real transformation. And without intensive practice, sustained practice, I somewhat doubt that we'll get teachers coming out of it, you know. So if we don't have, in the West, there's very few places where you can be supported. In fact, I know some are half so. You might do 3 months in Barre, Massachusetts, in the States. But there's very little long-term practice. You have to go now still to Myanmar or a few odd places in maybe Malaysia or Thailand to do this intensive practice. But we need teachers. I mean, I've been, not now, going back to Thailand and teaching monks there for 2-3 years. I was teaching hundreds of monks there. I don't know, they all had done a concentration-based practice, samatha. And they've lost the Vipassana. You'll find in Buddhist countries, actually. The Vipassana is lost. It's easier to feel good. Okay? People can pump up the concentration, induce a state, calm, pleasure, but
no insight.
No insights, yes, sir.
And the beauty of this practice, looking and focusing on the Satipatthana, one doesn't need to be a monk 2,500 years ago to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even need to be a Buddhist monk or Buddhist nun to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even need to be a Buddhist to practice it.
No, definitely not. No.
Very plain, simple to see,
Mm-hmm.
a practical application to understand the whole mind-body dynamic and what causes stress, suffering, what reduces, relieves, and frees the mind from stress and suffering.
So that's right, John. Yeah, no, you don't have to be Buddhist, and it will unfold. What I found, my own experience going back, I'd already, before I went to Burma, I had been practicing in Thailand and Sri Lanka, I got to the point, after 10 years of so-called practice, I realised I didn't know much at all. Nothing really had greatly happened. When I got to Burma, and with the teachers there, they gave me the instructions, you know, and I heard it many times before, and I thought, that's simplistic, I know that, you know. Sure, I knew about it, but had I actually implemented it, had I actually practiced? No. So then I'm stuck, you know. I was stuck there for a year. So luckily enough, with a very strong teacher who wouldn't take any pretense, I just practiced the basic technique, and it develops over time, you know. It doesn't matter how slow you are, dumb you are, you just keep going. It refines itself, you get deeper and deeper into the practice. So that's it. So I see the Buddha Dharma as a practice. If it's religion, well, certainly it's been made into religion. Can't say that, you know, culturally. But it's a practice. That's the heart of the Buddhist meditation, is this practice of mindfulness.
So in a way, through that practice, there is significant neurological or brain changes occurring that then allow the mind to see, know, be, feel, express itself in a way that's not caught into the fundamental ills of greed and anger.
That identification. It's like identify with what we are. We live in the content of the mind rather than, you know, the reality. We live in our story, our autobiographical self. That's all thoughts, and people can't see outside their thinking. Yeah. It's all there, all the mental constructs, and that's it. That's the reality, is it? It's constructions. You know? So it's very difficult on this. But you need a guide. That's a difficult thing, and I'm most grateful for my teachers in Myanmar who I could work off with and guide.
So do you feel there's a particular set of ingredients that are needed for, say, awakening? Like you obviously a place, as a situation, like Bodhi Tree Monastery, and then a support system to support the practice, having a practice, making it a practice, but as you're saying, a guide, a teacher.
Teacher, that is critical. Somebody who's had travel experience, not a book person, not a scholar who's got all the knowledge about, but somebody who's actually experienced. In fact, those Burmese masters are the ones I've been involved with, are the equivalent of a Master of Divinity. They went through the academic side of it. But even the teacher said to me, "You just forget about all that, just do it, you know." And that was a lesson. You just, however basic it is, how simplistic it seems, you just do it. And it's because the Buddhist term for this practice is not meditation. In Pali, in the early Buddhism, it was called bhavana, a Pali term which means to develop some quality. So vipassana bhavana, metta bhavana, see? So it's developmental. And unless you put the time and effort, sustained effort into it, you will not get into the depths of the practice. It just doesn't happen. I mean, the rare person who just picks it up like that. No, it slowly unfolds through your sustained effort, focus there with a guide. Yeah. Without that, I mean, I wandered around for 10 years, went to a lot of teachers, different places. Oh, sure, I could go on about it, you know, and learnt about it, but hadn't got any insight.
So having found a situation, a place, such as Bodhi Tree Monastery, and a practice that can be done, and a teacher such as yourself, what are the psychological ingredients that somebody needs to actually make it a practice, to do the practice, to make it happen?
Well, it's hard to say. Most people I feel come to the practice, not excluding myself, through some traumas or, you know, stress in their lives, you know, and they're looking for healing, essentially, I think. Most people who come to just join up a meditation retreat. So if that's felt strongly, and they get some positive feedback, you know, even psychological at the beginning, then
that becomes a motivation, the motivation to be free from their stress.
From the suffering, we can call it. Because the Buddha, you know, the Buddha said it when he was out in the forest. He picked up a handful of leaves, you know, and he said, all these trees in this forest, many thousands, many leaves, there's many different teachings, many different ways. This is what I'm teaching in my hand, I'm giving it to you. Is to be free of suffering. Yeah.
That's all that's needed.
That is, you know, and rest follows. And I feel that you know, that especially in Theravada Buddhism, the early Buddhism, as it was presented in the West, it was an emphasis on being all suffering. Sure, but I think the Buddha's message was saying, yes, the fact of suffering, it's there. The cause, people don't take much notice. It's the hankering in the mind, you know, and that's biological too, you know, of course. But it can end. How? This is the Eightfold Path, the meditation skills, and so he's saying suffering is unnecessary if you can be free of it. So, and that's what that's the basic Buddhist teaching, you know.
Do you feel that people have the commitment and the patience?
Yeah, that's a hard thing.
Well, they need to develop that. Start the practice, and in the practice, develop the patience, develop the commitment to the engaged right effort to make it happen.
To sustain your effort, you know, in spite of all the difficulties. There's a story in the text of before the Buddha was enlightened. As he was an ascetic monk, and he would go, as they still do in India, and as Buddhist monks still do today in Buddhist countries, go for alms round. So they carry this bowl, an alms bowl, And he was washing his bowl in the Narrandera River next to Gaia, where he eventually tried for his final breakthrough, the enlightenment. And as he was washing the bowl, the story goes that the bowl slipped out of his hand and went against the current upstream. So the story suggests, well, it was a miracle and sign of him being enlightened. But you could read it also as a metaphor that this practice is going against the current, right? And you're going to create white water. That's why it's not easy. It's not an easy path. But if you do concentration practice, you induce a state, you feel good. And that's what people are after. Yeah. But it's not transformational. Yeah. So it requires a lot of application and support. You need support. I think that's what I felt hugely grateful. I don't just lock myself into the Burmese tradition, but I would say it was available there for an outside to go in and practice, and it's still there. People have got very deep practice. There's masters still there, and they will. That's what they're there for, to guide you along.
Is there a particular book that you'd recommend that may be written by or transcribed talks by a particular teacher, Burmese master that you recommend?
There's so much literature there.
What have you found really helpful?
Well, I first studied the Dhammapada. That was the verse of the Buddha, and there's a lot about Vipassana in there, if you read between the lines. But, there's classics on there's The Heart of Buddhist Meditation, Nyanaponika Thera. He was a German monk. More Western-orientated teachers who actually connected with Mahasi Sayadaw too. But also there's a book called Satipatthana Vipassana, The Direct Path to Realization by Analayo Bhikkhu. He's a German monk, and that's a modern translation of it was actually his PhD thesis, you know that?
Yeah.
And it gives you, I was hoping to use it here as a teaching text, have a study group, because that'd be directly. It's not just one person's take on the Satipatthana practice, it's all the modern teachers, what they're in, and there's a lot of... So that would be another one, the Heart of Buddhist Meditation, Nyanaponika Thera, and Satipatthana Vipassana, Direct Path to Realization, Analayo Bhikkhu. But of course there's lots on the web.
Sure.
But again, it's not the doing, is it? You can feel you need a map, but if you just read the map, that isn't enough. You've got to do the journey. And it's not so pretty, it's not so, nicely set out there, especially if you're going cross country. And this practice is unknown territory of the mind. So you can get lost, you can get deluded, so you certainly need experience, guides and teachers or mentors, which are rare. I personally only found it in Burma, with a handful of teachers there. I've been in Thailand, I've been in Sri Lanka. I think that's what I saw there. In the forest monasteries, it's too diverse. It's too, whereas in the Burmese yurtas, meditation centres, it's just focused on the practice. You don't go and do domestic chores or anything. You just work deeply there, and then report to the teacher. You're not sitting there every second day. You have to make a report. So it keeps you on your toes, and you get the feedback. You get the guidance, you get the correction, need be, And they've been through it, They don't have many teachers, so it's not any Joe Blow can be a teacher, because they've studied a bit, they've done the practice.
Any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with us? And then for those that maybe get a chance to see this video in terms of Buddhist practice, meditation, finding their way to meditation, and what to watch out for, and so that they don't get distracted into a maybe wrong meditation, the wrong path of meditation.
Yes, yeah, because there's so much now in the spiritual supermarket.
Well, and especially with mindfulness.
With mindfulness, everybody's doing mindfulness. I don't think that they understand what they're doing, even what the term means. You know, full attention, presence, maintaining presence of mind is it's become a
mindfulness.
So, I mean, I'm personally just a practitioner. I don't have any pretension other than I've been a practitioner for the last 40 years or so. And I think you practice, you know, you need a guide, you need a teacher. There's no way you can pick up from literature and texts. They're just maps, you know, but you've actually got to practice.
And a teacher that's been teaching for a long time, practicing for a long time. Because again, there's people go into a weekend workshop in mindfulness, especially psychologists. I'm a psychologist myself, and whilst I've been practicing meditation for nearly 40 years as well, but there's so many psychologists that go into a weekend workshop in mindfulness, then they're teaching mindfulness, and often maybe not from their own real experience, and maybe even getting people confused in the process.
Yes, and it can be risky to do that with people who, if a teacher doesn't understand what can come through and how to handle that person, you know, it's not. You definitely got to have a experienced, qualified person who's had the travel experience. There's nothing. It's experiential knowledge. It's not second-hand book knowledge or, you know, superficial. Doing some short-term retreat is experiential knowledge, and that's why it's not even in Buddhist countries. Only it was revived by Mahasi Sayadaw in the after the war, Second World War. It was pretty much lost. It was always easier to go and induce a concentrated state, bringing calm and peace, but that's not the practice by itself. So it's very difficult to put that across to people.
Well, it sounds like you're saying that what's really required in the context of what the Buddha taught, what the Buddha was pointing at in terms of the possibility of Nibbana and the path to that, it's through wisdom and insight that develops wisdom, not just some calm, but the wisdom that frees the mind from stress and confusion that then brings the peace and the ease, that contentment that we're looking for.
But it's also a purification of mind. In the instruction of Satipatthana Sutta, the first sentence is, you know, this is for the purification of beings. So it clears the mind out, brings clarity and all the traumas and emotions. So it is a purification. And that's not easy, but it's rewarding. And what else would you do? You know, once you got into it deep enough, you can't do anything else. Even we know people think, well, the Buddha got enlightened and that was the end of him. You know, he's ended up as a golden statue, but actually he practiced for the rest of his life. You know, his 40-year teaching career, more than 40 years. So the Buddha still is recorded to have doing sitting and walking meditation, you know, never stopped, you know. There's more subtleties and benefits you can get out as you practice. You can't ever say, you know, I've got it and that's it, you know, got a halo or something. There's nothing going to show like that. You just, and this is why it's beneficial here for me, especially being in a situation I've been organising and, you know, challenging. I'm not sitting in you know, in a monastery or a temple somewhere, you know, on a high seat, you know, looking holy. It's hands-on.
Practice.
It's all practice. That's why the Buddha emphasized that mindfulness, sati, is useful everywhere. I don't know where that quote comes from, but apparently it's attributed to the Buddha. It is useful everywhere, you know, whatever you're doing. So it's very much can be integrated into daily life. You have an advantage if you've done formal training, surely, but you know, there's many instances of lay people, housewives, committed people who got enlightened by doing an ordinary routine. If they've been on, you know, put on the right track by somebody. So there you go. It's all possible. But as I say, Bodhi Tree Forest Monastery, we want to have long-term intensive practice with qualified teachers. That's my vision, if you like.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So Venerable Panyavara, thank you very much for your time and care and attention in sharing with us today. And hopefully your vision of Bodhi Tree Monastery is fulfilled and becomes a wonderful refuge for many people to come and spend time at, practice meditation, satipatthana, and realise full clarity, freedom.
So yes, thank you, John. And what I say, Bodhi Tree Forest Monastery, the Vipassana Retreat Centre is open to all, and you're very welcome to come and try, see, but also try the practice.